So today we get to hear from Justice Lang Miers, who almost needs no introduction. She has done so much in the bar. She's done so much to help young lawyers, female lawyers, all lawyers in Dallas, really. And it's a treat to be able to feature her today and hear from her. As you all probably or hopefully know, she sits on the 5th District Court of Appeals here in Dallas, and before that had a civil litigation practice. She is going to be interviewed by her two children, which is so special. Before I introduce them, just briefly, just take a minute, personal privilege, and share a story, just kind of highlighting the kind of person and advocate she is for women and young lawyers. She may not remember this, but one of our cases went up for appeal. This has been probably a year or two ago, and I wrote the brief, as many of the young lawyers in here can probably attest to, and sat next to the senior lawyer at the firm, who rightfully so was arguing at oral argument, and he got up to introduce himself and started on his argument, and she said, "Don't you want to introduce your colleague that's with you today?" I think that just is a very small story that illustrates how personable she is and how much she understands what younger lawyers do in the cases that we work on. So I'm so excited. My heart's kind of racing because I think this is going to be a really fun interview for you guys. Here to interview her today are her two kids. Ellen Miers-Peoples is an SMU law grad. Many of you probably know her from law school, and she practiced here in Dallas and then in Houston, and now is a staff attorney at the 1st District Court of Appeals in Houston. And she has 3 kiddos. I think having children and how that plays into your career as a lawyer will come up, so I wanted to mention that. And then Justice Lang Miers' son, James Miers, is here as our other interviewer, and he is also an SMU law grad and now practices, is a real estate attorney and now practices at Jackson Walker and has a very new kiddo. Your first? Second, okay. A very new kiddo, and we'll probably share a little bit about that in the presentation. So I want to give them as much time as we can, so please join me in welcoming Justice Lang Miers, Ellen Peoples, and James Miers.
Hello?
Hello? All right.
So just really quickly, thank you, Jennifer, the DAYL, and the Dallas Bar Association for having us. This really is a distinct honor and privilege because we really grew up running around the halls of the Dallas Bar Association. And we're so proud of our mom, so we're glad to be here and get to share a little bit of insight into her life that maybe you all are not privy to. So our plan...
Probably not too much of my life you're not privy to.
Yeah, she is up for re-election, so we'll keep it PC. But no, in all seriousness, we're going to try to not be too scripted. We do have some points we want to hit, but we want this to flow more like a conversation. And we're going to try and stay on time. So just really quickly, we'll start with a little bit of background. Mom graduated from law school in the 70s.
Yes.
And she was one of about 10 women that were in the entire law school at the time. So some people in this room know what that's like, but for those of us younger attorneys, if you could just give us a little bit of insight, that would be great.
Well, I think I was quite naive going into law school. I just always thought I'd go to law school, and then I show up, and there were very few of us. There was one woman in the 3rd year class, a couple in the 2nd, and I don't know, 10 maybe in our class, I don't remember. And they had us all fit in the women's, they called it lounge, it was just a bathroom. And that's where we had to keep all our lockers, and we kind of just stayed in there because there were all these guys out there that were constantly roaming around. And so it was a unique experience, and I will say people really didn't know what to do with us very much, and certainly thought we were taking a man's place and would quit. And so there was a lot of tension there with quite a few people. It was also a time where there were a lot of folks coming back from the service in Vietnam. And so there was a lot of competition, as there always is, for the spaces there. And the guys particularly needed to get back into their lives. So it was a challenge.
So I know, or I've heard stories over the years about kind of interactions with other male students and how that was difficult. Did you have trouble with professors too? Was that something that, was there tension there, or were they a little more open to your being there?
I would say they were not open to us being there for the same reason that I mentioned. But in fact, the dean wasn't too fond of us. And at one point, we had, I think the women in the class were disproportionately high in the class. And so I took some of the women in to meet with the dean and kind of said, you need to realize that women are doing well and they will do well, and we're here, and we need to cut out some of the stuff that's happening. I think it was just odd. People didn't know what to do with us, and there were different expectations. And for some of the professors, it was the same thing. It's not anything they'd really encountered before, so they were confused.
Anything else that you want to touch on before we move on from law school? I know that you mentioned there were some rooms you'd never even been in, because those were the card rooms, the guys that play cards in.
There were areas of the law school that were definitely, I won't say off limits, but we just didn't go. But as by the time I was third year, there were a lot more women there, and so they had to have their lockers out in the hall and out where the guys' lockers were. So it evolved into a little bit better interaction.
What about, sorry, dive in. What about the job search out of law school?
How'd you end up in Texas?
Oh, okay, let's do that.
All right.
She moved around a lot growing up, but did high school, college, and law school all in Missouri. So.
Yeah. And then I clerked for a Missouri Supreme Court judge, and he was extraordinary. And that's a great job, particularly if you don't want to make a big decision or a commitment, which was kind of what I was doing. But early, I guess in 73 or so, my brother and his wife had moved to Texas, and his wife was a sorority sister of mine. So I thought, spring break in Dallas, Texas. I'll go to the beach. It'll be warm. Hadn't been here before.
Maybe some horses.
I figured it was close. Yeah, and of course it was cold and it wasn't spring breaky at all. But I met some lawyers, and that was a time where, as a woman law student or lawyer, you had to go meet every other woman who was a lawyer or a law student. And that wasn't really a bad thing. It was just kind of the presumption that we spoke some secret language, I guess. I don't know. So I met some lawyers then, and I met now their aunt, Harriet Miers, and talked to some people at what was then Lott, Purnell, Boren, Laney, and Neely. And eventually they said, "Are you ever going to interview with us?" And I thought, well, yeah, sure. So I did, and they offered me a job. And I thought, what am I going to do in Dallas, Texas? What's it like? And so I took the job and moved down here, and I really didn't expect that I'd stay here that long, but here I am.
All right, so Ellen and I have heard this story many times, but it's a good story. So your first day you show up, what happens when you show up to the front desk like everybody does on their first day of work? What happens there?
Okay, so I show up at work, and I've moved here. I don't know anybody. My car broke down in Oklahoma. My furniture was missing. I don't know. So I showed up at work, and I'm thinking, okay, this is exciting. And I went to the reception desk, and all kind of, hi, I'm here to start work. And the receptionist said, well, who are you working for? And I thought, well, who would that be? And I thought, well, Stanley Neely. It was Locke, Purnell, Bourne, Laney, and Neely. He was head of litigation. So I said, well, Stanley Neely. And she said, well, I wonder what's wrong with Roberta. And I thought, Roberta, I don't know Roberta. And so they go find Roberta. It turns out Roberta is Stanley Neely's secretary, and they thought I was a substitute secretary. And so it took a while to kind of get till they figured out I was a new lawyer. So I go up, and I'm in this office, and I'm thinking, okay, I don't know really what lawyers do. I don't know what you do in a law firm. Just sitting here thinking, okay, what's my next step? And this redhead woman comes kind of flying in, sits down in front of me, closes the door, and she says, I told him I wouldn't work for you. I said I wouldn't work for a woman. I said I'd quit rather than work for you, and I'm not going to. And I just looked at her and I said, you know, this is my first day. I don't know anybody. My car broke down in Oklahoma. My furniture's gone. I don't feel real well. Could you just give me a break? And of course, we ended up getting along, and we worked together for a while. But it was, for a long time, it was perceived as kind of demeaning for a secretary to work with a woman lawyer. And so that's really what she was, she felt like she was really being imposed on. So, yeah, that was my cheery first day. In addition to calling people by totally the wrong names for a long time.
Ellen.
Oh, it's my turn. Sorry. Can you just tell us maybe a couple little anecdotes? Like, I know, she was obviously a rock star attorney from the get-go. Oh. But, despite her great work and lovely demeanor, she was excluded from a lot of different opportunities. So she's told us a lot of stories about, either not being put on cases or not being able to go to client meetings because they were held in men-only establishments.
Oh, yeah. Well, this was also a time where it was still, it was very transitional. There weren't that many women in business, and certainly not in law. And so a lot of the clubs just didn't have women eat right out in the open. And so, that's how it was. So if people would go upstairs, as they said, upstairs to lunch, I knew that meant I would go somewhere else. And there were just a lot of places like that. There were some places that were not. Trevor Reese-Jones, who was a wonderful gentleman, I don't know if anybody here would have known him. You may know his son. But he was such a wonderful gentleman, and he would always pick this club that was pretty far away, but we could go there and sit right out in the open. So that was something that transitioned over time, and some of it had to do with client demand, some had to do with numbers developing, but that was kind of an interesting experience.
And so you kind of hit on it a little bit, but dealing with how the other attorneys at the firm treated you, we'll say a little bit differently. What about clients? Were clients better or worse? Did you have to feel like you had to overcompensate all the time to try to show the clients you could keep up?
Well, I would say I was not, I don't know how many of you as young attorneys have had extensive client interaction, but, a lot of times in a big firm you don't have that extensive client interaction. But I did interact with the clients, and I was working on really, really big cases. So I didn't necessarily expect that I was going to be the first chair in any trials. And some clients were great, and some were not. We had, I remember a big tender offer litigation in the early '80s where all these lawyers came in from all over, but a lot from New York firms because the tender offer involved some firms up there. And when they went up to lunch and I couldn't go, they all kind of went, oh, well, then we're going to go somewhere else. And so in some cases, the clients were great. Other times, not so great, but I think part of the differentiation is I was pretty young. And so, young and female maybe wasn't exactly what clients were looking for when they wanted to hire somebody on a bet the business case.
Do you have a follow-up?
Sure, why not? How about, I know there weren't a lot of other female attorneys in Dallas at the time, but what was kind of that experience coming up with other, kind of first generation female attorneys, and how did y'all, growing up, obviously, knowing a lot of your friends who were also...
In fact, I think you thought all lawyers were women.
It's distinctly possible. But yeah, growing up, and like Ellen kind of referenced, running around the old part of the building and stuff like that, spending time at the office and all that. But, a lot of, you did have a lot of friends and colleagues, and I would imagine a big part of that was kind of shared experience as...
Yeah, and we're still very good friends. Several of us had started practice. I started practice mid-'70s. There were several of us that started practicing a little bit later than that, and then we started having children, and so we got to be good friends. And so we shared that common interest with some bar activities. So like Nina Cortell, who I think you probably know, and Barb Lynn, and they're just a whole bunch, a series of people who were going through the same thing at the same time. And one of the things we decided to do was kind of a twofold thing. One is to start a group which is now referred to as Attorneys Serving the Community, where what we did was just get together and pick a beneficiary and then raise money for it. And we really didn't want to come up with a name for it, but we ultimately did. And banded that group together, and I think now the people who are leading it have done wonderful things. But the other thing, and I would encourage people to do this generally, male or female, is that we started a lunch group, which we called B&B, and I'm not going to tell you what it stands for. But we started having lunch together every month, I'm going to say late 80s, and there are 12 of us, and we meet once a month. We still do. We've gone from, starting practice to having kids to now sharing our grandchildren's pictures and stuff. And what we do is each person hosts it 1 month and picks a beneficiary. And there's some things you can't choose as a beneficiary. And we each contribute $100 to that beneficiary. And it's really just a bunch of gossip and fun. But over the years, that's turned into, contributing a lot of money. And so we've stayed close. We don't always have, not everybody makes it every month, but it's been a very good support group over the course of, 30 plus years, I guess.
Okay, let's talk about kids. So I distinctly remember what was going through my head when I found out I was pregnant and working at a big firm, and I remember going into a couple of people's offices, including Sean Brown's, and asking people, what do I do? How do I go about telling people? How's this going to affect my life, my career? I obviously did this in a very different time. So can you tell us what it was like for you when you you obviously wanted to have children, as well as have a career, which was not a commonplace at the time. Not that women didn't want to, I don't mean to imply that, but that was not the model that you were used to growing up watching. So what was it like when you made that transition into motherhood?
Well, I was scared. I mean, just the idea of becoming a parent is kind of scary. And I had been kind of deciding about it, how some of you may have thought through this. I did, and it's just not a good thought process, like when is the best time, a good time. There isn't. You just struggle through. And so I ended up finding out I was pregnant, and I thought, how am I going to tell people at the firm this? And I waited a long time. And believe me, I was very big when I was pregnant. I'm going to tell you how big I was if you don't repeat it. But I was, I gained over 60 pounds. So the first 4 or 5 months, I got very big, and I didn't tell anybody. And, and I think people are just going, oh my God, what's happening? And so I thought, okay, I can't wear anything. This is uncomfortable, and I'm just sick of not telling people. So I bought some maternity clothes, and I went to work one day, and a lovely woman I adored, I worked with at the time, who was, 1 or 2 years with the firm, and she communicated a lot to people. So I thought, this is the way to do it. And
There's always one.
And she came in and she said, I like your dress. And I said, it's a maternity dress. And then everybody knew. So that's how I let people know. Not a way I recommend, but I thought this is an easy way to go. And it was just an oddity, and people thought, what does that mean, and how's that going to work? And I thought that too.
So you have a child.
Yes, this is my first precious child.
So she happens, and then you're still working at the firm, I assume.
Yes.
I mean, we've talked about it before, but how did you approach? I mean, not only are you dealing with, excuse me, not only are you dealing with the unique experience of being a new mother, but you are also dealing with the unique experience of being one of very few women at your firm who have, had a child.
Were you the first woman to have a child? Because you were the second. My aunt was the first female at Locke. My mom was the second.
Yeah.
Were there other women that had had children?
There was there was a woman before me, and then she left, and I'm trying to think of who was before me. But I'd been there a while when I had you.
So we can safely say that you were one of the first women.
Okay, there you go.
Did you feel like I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Just dive in.
This is, did you feel like the expectation was that you would quit? Did anyone
when I
ask
got
you
married
directly? Because by the time I
Yeah.
did this, people knew better than to ask that question, at least on the record. But did people ask you and assume that you weren't going to come back to work?
Well, people thought when I got married to your dad, I was going to quit. I mean, that was kind of and he, I believe, was making negative money. He was a medical resident, so yeah, we could have lived on that. But yeah, I think so. I think people did, and generally, we're not directly saying, when are you going to quit? But I think that was kind of the thought process.
Okay, I'm going to go now.
Go now.
So, like we established, you were one of the first women, and so you were also a new mother dealing with all that. How did you have to change your practice, kind of how you operated, to make it all work in those, I guess, first year or two after you had Ellen?
Well, anybody who's with or been with a law firm know knows it's all about billable hours and business development. And I would say I became extremely efficient because I knew what my time limits were. We didn't have computers, we didn't have cell phones, dinosaurs weren't roaming, but it was just a very different time. I couldn't leave to go do something and be on the phone. I had to be in my office when the phone would ring. If I was on a conference call, I had to take it in my office. And so it was just a very different experience where I had to be very conscious of scheduling and then still getting the hours in. So the thing that I think a lot of women lose, and this is true with, James has got 2 kids and he's practicing law, and it's hard to build in those business development hours in addition to getting your billable time done. And some of the business development obviously comes from communicating with people in the law firm, going to lunch, getting together informally with them, or just talking to them in their office. And if you're not on a real serious schedule, you can do that and still go back and finish billing your time and finish your work. But if you know you've got to get it all done in a certain period of time, and if you go grocery shopping during lunch, like I did a lot, or things that you try to get done, or take kids to a doctor's appointment, it gets rid of that walking around and talking to people. Sean's nodding her head, but that's there's a bit of isolation that I think happens, and it makes the business development more difficult, as well as getting the hours done. So, but I think now that we've all got cell phones and computers, you're not dragging them as often as I certainly did to the office at night and on weekends, and you can interact with them better. No, I've interacted.
She likes to
fine
tell
with
a
them.
story about James as a toddler. She came out of her office off of a conference call, and you found him.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Lock Lord has, as many law firms do, but has fabulous artwork.
yeah, that was,
Just to tee this up.
yeah. Locke has a lot of very nice artwork out in the hallway, and there was some nice artwork right outside
Particular
my
is still
office
there.
at the time. And I think there had been a TRO or something happened on a Friday. So I had to be down there on the phone with people on Saturday. And James was, I don't know where you were, but
Being perfect.
being perfect. But James was, little, I don't know, 3 or 4, if you can ever imagine this guy little. And so I had this little TV that had a VCR player in it that I would bring, and the expectation was they could watch a movie, and it wasn't as much fun as iPads and stuff. So I'm on a speakerphone talking to these people who are, of course, wrong as they can be about what needs to happen, and we're debating about this TRO and going forward and very serious about it. And James looks at me and he just turns the volume up real loud. And the people go, "What is that? What is that?" Well, I don't know, because this isn't something, you can.
And forbid you tell him it's your child.
Yeah. No, they already thought we were less committed and not as serious about it. I'm thinking, are you kidding me? I'm here with this kid. Or you think I'm not as serious as you are? But so then that ended, and then I heard this kind of sound on the outside of my office. And I hesitated a minute, and I went out there, and this nice artwork, James was just kind of batting at it. And I'm thinking, no, I do not want to have to pay for that piece of artwork. But, that's just a little slice of obviously what you do when you're on the phone and dealing with kids at the same time.
I want to make a note real quick. The quality of this artwork increases every time this story is told. I think when it
Hundreds
started,
of thousands of
when
dollars.
yeah, when it started
Millions
off,
of
when it started
dollars.
off, it was like finger paints.
It was a Picasso.
And then, yeah, now it's like a Rembrandt. It's just,
The actual
I want that
Mona
for the
Lisa.
record, for posterity.
There's so many good James stories, but this is not about James. So moving on. So I'm curious, and we talk a lot about some of the challenges women and men face in the profession, but the whole work-life balance ideal. Do you think, based on your experience, that you were more empathetic or less to other women who were coming up behind you? Like, do you think you were harder on them, or that you cut them a little bit more slack?
I think
Sean's available afterwards to
yes,
confirm or deny.
this is a fact-checking operation. Now, I think I was more empathetic in a lot of respects because I understood what was happening, but I think I was just as tough on the women as the men because the professional responsibility is the same. And law firms are not beneficent organizations. I know it's a shock, but you have that responsibility to the client regardless of what else is happening in your life, and you have to achieve that. And so I think I tried to help and I tried to give advice, and I don't know, Sean, was that? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
She's tough on everyone. I can vouch for that.
What? No.
No, she has high standards, which is a good thing.
All right, so young attorney, children, make partner, practice as a partner, senior partner, all that good stuff. Were there opportunities, I know there's some, we don't have to dig into specifics, but opportunities available to you or that could have been available to you that you decided to pass up because, you did try to have that good work-life balance? If you had just kind of gone full, Wolf of Wall Street on it and just been completely committed to your work over everything else, well, maybe not the best example, but
She's very committed to her work.
yeah, but above everything else and kind of just, let Ellen and I figure it out and see you maybe once a month. What was that like, making that decision and having to pass up on opportunities and all that? Jay?
Well, there certainly are those experiences that you had to make determinations and what could you do. I didn't have the luxury of having a huge amount of backup support, and that allowed me to develop a great bond with my children. And so there are opportunities you pass up in that, and I don't regret a single decision like that. I also have forgotten, so that's...
Yeah, well, I know there were opportunities there, and they would have required some pretty massive changes, not just for you, but for all of us. And they would have obviously been good opportunities, but I think that speaks to, your commitment to maintaining the, try to maintain some sort of family work balance, which,
Yeah, I don't know that there is any balance. I used to have a lot of what I referred to as beam me up Scotty moments. And I actually would say that, beam me up Scotty, like going to trial in the morning and they're both vomiting amoxicillin on the carpet with fevers, and I'm thinking, beam me up Scotty, I'm going to trial, what's going to happen? And so it's anything like that, things that you don't have a choice about and you have to figure out what to do, to actually affirmatively making decisions about priorities. And I think we all do that every day. And some decisions I made were I think good, and I hope good for the kids, and I feel, I'm very happy about it.
So I think a lot of people in here are probably curious to get kind of your take on what it was like being a parent and how you felt like you were doing, and our take, because the older I get and the more children I have, now I have 3.
And maybe more?
No,
As a grandparent,
it would be a blessing, little surprise.
yeah, as a grandparent, you want, I have more.
If you had stayed in private practice for a little longer and had a few more trust funds set up, maybe that would have been an option for her. Yeah, more trust fund for
Right.
grandchildren.
Right.
But
So that's on
tell
you,
us,
Mom.
So tell us how you felt day to day. I mean, I know I personally feel like on any given day, it's like triage. I'm just trying to figure out where the biggest fire is, whether it's at home with a sick kid or a big deadline at work or, another personal family matter, and just trying to take care of it. And I have a feeling, that just doesn't really change from generation to generation, no matter how far women have come in the profession. But the older I get, the more I start to think of my mom as superwoman.
Oh, well, that's good, huh?
So just as some
She just doesn't
reassurance
know.
to all the
She doesn't
parents, women and men out there, that
Well, I
can be
always
a good
felt
parent.
most days I was, one day if you feel like work is great, I'm hitting it, we're in trial, it's great, and yet you're feeling like, but I'm missing this thing I want to do with the kids. I had this in my head, this idyllic vision that, if I could just be home one afternoon and we'd sit there and read together and it would be so calm. And of course, it was never that way. But
as a side note, I took some time off to stay home, and that doesn't happen.
it doesn't happen. But I think most days I felt like I was failing at one part of it. You feel like you're maybe not getting the work done exactly the way you want because the kids are sick, and then you feel badly they're sick. What am I? But the balance thing I think is hard. I think just for men and women, it's just hard to find that balance. What is the best you can do on any given day? And the work we do is hard. Family life can be challenging, but I think as lawyers particularly, we're very fortunate because what we're doing is choosing between options. You're deciding, well, I want to practice and have a family, and that's hard. But it's not as hard as, maybe being a waitress, jingling change in your pocket, looking for money for childcare and trying to figure out what to do with them. So I think the challenge is that we expect ourselves to be perfect in each area and to cut yourself some slack. The mere fact that my children are here and not incarcerated should give you some comfort.
She set the bar high. But I know, at least from my perspective, and I think James would agree, I don't remember you missing a single soccer game or school event. And I know you probably remember all of the ones you missed, and it feels like there were a lot of them. But I know that you made that a priority, and we're very thankful for that. So thank you. Do you have any questions for us related to the discussion here?
No, I just want to say I'm so blessed. You can see how blessed I am, and that if you're going through the process of raising children and the challenges of that, and the process of thinking, oh my God, what have I done to them, or what's going to happen to them, that I think there's a lot of comfort in knowing that over time it works out and they can end up being, great. I'm just blessed. I have wonderful children and great, successful, brilliant children who are raising their own wonderful people. So I don't know if do you have more questions? Oh.
We've reached the end of our outline.
I don't know. Do you guys have questions for them, probably?
Again, it's about her.
Well, I did think it was about them, because I do think a lot of, when you're going through the practice, you are struggling. There's some comfort, I think, in knowing that everybody struggles with this balance, and particularly if you're billing your time and trying to develop business, and you've got to hit the wall every day, so that you end up at the end of the month with enough hours, and then you got to collect it and do the work and all of that. And I know that's very hard to do, and everybody experiences that. But if you want to do it and raise children, I think you can. It's just that you're not going to win every day in every aspect of your life. But I guess I hope there's some comfort in seeing that it works out pretty well.
Yeah, I know. One thing we've talked about is, I think for everybody, but especially I think for female attorneys, well, women in general, but female attorneys, is that generally the harshest critic is yourself. And I think Ellen kind of hit on it a little bit on, expecting yourself to be able to do everything perfectly, expecting yourself to be able to be not only the perfect attorney, but the perfect mom and the perfect wife, and that being such a hard, thing to try to juggle, and more or less impossible, but being able to kind of find what works for you, and how that, how you can, like you said, not really necessarily find balance, because there is no balance, but being able to find the system that fits you and what works for you. I know that's something, we've talked about at great length.
Yeah, and I do think this is perhaps more an issue for women, and I would encourage you to work on this mindset, is that I think women tend to think, I have to really know how to do this before I go do it. I have to really be perfect at it. I have to do everything perfectly, like James said. And James and Ellen were both very active growing up and through law school with a lot of activities, and certainly with sports. But I really wanted Ellen to be in competitive sports. And I think Title IX has a huge impact for women, because you couldn't be in really competitive sports when I was growing up, no matter whether you wanted to or not. And I really like the put me in coach mentality that I think happens when you've been in competitive sports and you want to stand by the coach and say, put me in, I can do it. Whereas a lot of times, and I'm guilty of this, I was guilty of this too, you start out thinking, I really have to know how to do this. I really have to know how to do it perfectly before I try to do it. And I would encourage you to just take the put me in coach mentality. If you're going to trial, if Michael Hurst is the first chair, he's probably going to give you a chance to do something. Put me in, coach. One of the first trials I went to was with a very experienced trial lawyer, and he was hilarious. But I had not been given any part of the trial to do. I'd done briefing and all this stuff, and so that's what I expected to do. And we're sitting there in the voir dire, and it may have been the first voir dire I'd seen, I don't know. But anyway, so he leans over to me just when the judge is getting ready to have us start the case. He says, you want to do the voir dire? And I thought I was going to vomit all over. I mean, it was really, what? And it was a huge client, so I don't think for a second he thought that would work. He was just messing with me. But really, I would say, take the attitude, put me in, coach. If you want to move up in responsibility, put me in, coach. I can do it. I'll learn how to do it. I can do it better than anybody else, or at least as well as somebody over here who's saying, put me in, coach. And I think that's one thing that women are not as likely to do. They're likely to wait for somebody to recognize their excellence You're so good. I'm gonna give you this opportunity. But now my kids have heard me say this before, but you're not at the top of anybody else's to-do list. You know, everybody's got a lot going on. Everybody's got a lot going on professionally, personally. So you need to be the one that targets, Michael, I really would like to take a couple witnesses, or, you know, what can I do in this case front line? Or I want to go to that closing, I want to work on closing the deal, whatever it is, but just do the put me in coach. And I think that's something you have to kind of push yourself to, which is not necessarily, yes, ma'am. Well, professionally, it certainly was experience at work. There were people I came to rely on who I knew could do certain things, and then I encouraged them to move ahead and take more responsibility. And I think that's the delegation, that you trust them, you know. So you need to make sure you're hitting on all cylinders when you're working with people, of course, before you say, put me in, coach. And so I think that just got to be comfortable in the way law firms are set up, and particularly on big cases, you're just used to, you know, delegating to a lot of different people in the team. Personally, you know, you're used to, you want things a certain way in a certain place, and you want things to be organized in work. And I think you just have to be able to accept a little chaos in your personal life, particularly with kids. You know, they're not, everything changes constantly. But if you have people, we had a full-time babysitter for 16 years. And in fact, she was like 4'8" when James was well over 6 feet, trying to, you know, tell him you need to do this. But you just have to get used to kind of chaos, that things don't necessarily run right. Things aren't put away where you think they are, and do laundry in the middle of the night, whatever it is. I think it's easier at work, you know, because you have particularly because law firms are so hierarchical, you can get people, you know, organized to do certain tasks, getting ready for trial or whatever. So I think it's just a comfort level. You just, things you worry about, you just kind of have to quit worrying about. Yes, ma'am. I think it's all about prioritization. You know, when you decide, and actually, for all kinds of reasons, the best part of my life has always been these two, and now their families, and just the most wonderful part of my life. But it really makes you focus, you know. It makes you prioritize. It makes you be efficient. How am I going to get this done within the period of time I need to? And it makes you decide to let go of stuff you don't need to. And so I think the real issue is to try to avoid, you can't avoid it altogether, but to try to avoid the process that's natural in practicing law, which is, kind of you keep moving up, more money, bigger cases, all of this. Well, that's great, that's fine. But sometimes you're going to have to make the choices, and the priority gets down to, am I going to be out of town in trial for 5 months, or am I going to be in town? Am I going to, all the various things that you have to decide. And like anything else, you look back and you say, I can't even remember why that was such a hard decision. I can't remember what that other thing was. But I think it's just kind of pulling back in priorities. You and many other women in this room have made those same decisions. And I think it's just great. It works fine. And I don't think really that I was a trailblazer, but I think, if you start out doing something before anybody else, you do feel a certain responsibility to not mess it up too much. But I wouldn't say stay somewhere you don't like being because you feel you have a responsibility to, as a role model or anything like that. I just make sure it fits the priorities you have and your family has too. So, we may be.
Yeah, some of us are hourly, so.
Please join me in giving Justice Langmyers and Ellen and James a huge round of applause. Thank you all for being here. Mark your calendars. Our next interview in the series will be with Chief Judge Barbara Lynn, being interviewed by Monica Latin, September the 5th. So thank you again.